stealth aircraft after it purchased a Russian air defense system in 2019. But Trump today said Turkey has been, quote, loyal. How are you reading all of this?
I think what you see is this is emblematic of the president's friction within NATO and frustration with various members of the alliance. He's looking at Turkey, seeing it playing, in his mind, a more constructive role than perhaps Germany or France might be. But there's a much broader context happening right here. As you rightly noted, they were suspended from purchasing the F-35s in 2020. There's bipartisan legislation on the books, and I believe actually today there was bipartisan legislation further introduced in Congress to prevent the sale of F-35s. The big concern was at the time, and still, is that the sensitive technology that is embedded in the F-35 may leak, unfortunately, to the Russians because the Turks have bought the S-400 air defense system and are operating that currently.
And Joshua, speaking of Turkey, Trump says the only reason he agreed to attend NATO is because President Erdogan asked. Now, Trump said he was very disappointed by how allies treated the United States over Iran. Some read this as Trump calling into question whether the United States would defend a NATO ally under attack. How do you think this will play out?
I think the president likes to have the limelight and the spotlight on him and the attention on him. By saying he reluctantly went to go to this, he's gracing the alliance with his presence and participation in this. So there's a bit of political theater and a bit of Manhattan negotiating style with this. The real issue is that there's a lot of great activity that is happening within NATO that is a bit overshadowed by this performative theater, if you will. In the last 2 years alone, $258 billion have been invested in European defense. That's bringing what Canada and the European members of NATO are doing up significantly. Just today, Secretary General Mark Rutte was in front of the alliance announcing some $50 billion worth of additional deals. So what the president wanted last year at the Hague Summit was 3.5% to 1.5% spending on defense. Now we're coming in 1 year on from that, and there's 5 countries that have already reached that target, and the rest of the alliance is making the steps necessary to increase their own expenditures and contribute more to European defense and security, which is exactly what the president wants.
And Joshua, you've actually written a book about this. How would you rate Europe's defense posture?
So the manuscript is in the offing. It is submitted, so hopefully we'll see that come next year. I think what we're seeing right now, and this is what the exciting part is, there's a genuine good news story happening within NATO. Where they were is not where they are, is not where they're going to be tomorrow or next year. You're seeing a lot of big investments in airborne early warning aircraft, for example. You're seeing investments in next-generation air-independent propulsion submarines. You're seeing investments in A400M, which are tactical heavy lift aircraft. So a lot of the capabilities that the United States provided and delivered to NATO are now being developed by the European partners. So Europe is stepping up in a big way. Now, this is not to say that there are not going to be challenges. The political, economic, fiscal situations across the alliance are going to be challenging. Some countries will hit that target before others. Norway, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are already well on the way to that target. The big issue is going to be, what does the United Kingdom do, what does France do, and what does Germany do? They are the 3 largest economies of Europe. So overall, I'm optimistic in the direction that things are going. It's going to be much more in line with Undersecretary Elbridge Colby wrote, which is NATO 3.0, where the European partners are primarily responsible for conventional defense and deterrence, with the United States providing enabling and a strategic backstop to that. It's not going to be a smooth process. It's going to be challenging, and there's going to be hiccups along the way. But I'm overall optimistic in the direction that it's heading.
And very quickly on Norway, you've also written about how Norway is one of NATO's strongest partners. What are they doing right?
Well, what they're doing right is they're spending more, and they're spending it smartly, if you will. So they're jettisoning legacy classes, for example, with their Navy, and simplifying what was a Cold War era hangover system where they had a lot of classes of vessels, and simplifying it down to 2 classes primarily, an ocean-going and a coastal maritime littoral capability. So it makes it simpler. They're acquiring 212CDs, which are air-independent propulsion submarines from Germany. They're going to cross-train with the Germans so they have interoperability. So they're spending more, but they're also spending it on the right capabilities to be fully interoperable. And they're very focused in their operational domain, which is the high north and the Arctic. So they're taking on a great deal of responsibility, working with the United Kingdom, working with Denmark. And as we talked about at the beginning with Greenland, there is the idea of the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, which is where Russian submarines would go into the Atlantic Ocean. Norway's taking a big role and responsibility in defending that area. So Norway is doing a lot of things, spending more, spending it smartly, and integrating, interoperating with all of its allies across the alliance.
And expanding on that, President Trump also reiterated wanting to acquire Greenland. What was your response to the president's remarks and his national security assessment here?
So President Trump, again, is a Manhattan property developer. He likes saying things that are slightly outlandish and slightly unrealistic because it sets the tone of negotiation. You always say, I want 100%, and you look to settle for 50% perhaps. By keeping this at the front and center of the mind for the allies, it's saying that this is a major security priority for him. And understandably it is, because as I mentioned, the GI-UK gap, this is a major significant area of transit point for Russian submarines and potentially a throughput if the Northern Sea Route, which will transit across the Arctic Ocean, down into the Atlantic and down towards ports like Rotterdam, which means you're going to have potentially much more Chinese activity, much more Russian activity up there. So by putting it out there and saying, I want this is something that is important to me, you get the allies to respond to it. Now, this is absolutely disruptive, and it has a strategic impact on the allies. It disrupts and fragments relationships and has had a deleterious effect on across the board. On top of the fact that the United States could have gotten most of what it wanted through existing treaties. So it's a negotiating tactic, but there are consequences for this negotiating tactic.
Joshua Huminski, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
From his own party to get out of the race. In a video posted Monday, Plattner directly addressing the claim from a woman he dated in 2021.
I wanted to directly address the troubling, serious, and false allegations against me. Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically false.
Plattner canceling town hall events, saying he's weighing next steps for his campaign. At an unrelated news conference today in New York City, Mayor Zohran Mamdani asked about the Maine race and whether Plattner should step aside.
I believe that it's time for him to drop out of the race. And when it comes to my own endorsements, I've made 8 endorsements at the state and federal level. They've all been right here in New York City. I'm incredibly excited at the fact that they won their races, and that's where my focus is for now.
And pressed on whether the scandal and what many see as the likely end of Plattner's campaign could be a big setback for the broader progressive movement. Mamdani saying the focus should be on the campaign coming to a close, with many more days ahead to talk about what it means beyond that. Joining me now, though, our most excellent panel: Dave Martin, NTD senior sports reporter and election data analyst; Mike Leon, host of the Can We Please Talk podcast; and Chris Baum, NTD's political correspondent. Thank you all so much for being here. So looking right in here, Democratic establishment and socialist heavyweights alike are calling on Plattner to step down. Some of them are taking a lot of heat for not dropping him earlier. Mike, how are you reading all of this?
Like everybody else is. I mean, Plattner shouldn't have even gotten to here, given everything that's come around with his candidacy and things that have come out, not only from the tattoo, from his Marine days, not only other women that have accused him of certain things, the infidelity with his, I mean, all of these things in a normal, if this was 2000, we wouldn't even have a Graham Plattner being the candidate. I've read some independent media sources that are saying that he's expected to drop out by later tonight. Now, I know he has a deadline of July 13th before the, obviously, Maine Democratic Party can step in and nominate somebody else. But the way I'm reading it is, you know, we have to be able to call this out when it happens on any side of the political aisle. Somebody with this much baggage coming into an election cycle should never get this far down the trough to be the representative of a party.
And Chris, your thoughts and any takes on his potential replacements?
Well, he's united the radicals and the moderates and everything. I mean, that's the news story of the day, really, and it's a terrible story. I think, you know, Chuck Schumer and you had Kirsten Gillibrand, senators from New York, but also in charge of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. They basically said, we're not going to fund anything going on in Maine if he's on the ballot. So they really need him to get out. It's not like someone else is going to come in like a Cuomo type situation or something like that. He's done, and he's probably going to resign later today. But you look at, like, Katie Britt came out with something. You know, she said on the Republican side, obviously, that, you know, we knew about the tattoo. We knew about the other forms of abuse. We knew everything else from the Reddit posts. But, you know, was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I guess it's just the outpouring, and you don't see many people going to stand with Graham Plattner, really, except for like Cenk Uygur and his nephew, or Stephen King, who quoted the Bible. He said, "Those who have, if you're without sin, throw the first stone," which is not really an excuse to allow politicians to rape people, but it's your take on theology. But Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders. Bernie basically said when this was brought up initially, and he was fielding all of these questions about the accusations, he said, "I'm going to do whatever I can to fight to make sure Graham Plattner is elected." Now he had a call with him, and he said it's not right.
It's been a lot because Ro Khanna also took back his endorsement.
A lot of people.
In terms of Maine, it's been quite interesting because Susan Collins is quite formidable as a candidate, but that is a state where Kamala Harris won more points than President Trump did. So there is that in terms of the primary where Plattner won. A lot are pointing back to that and saying that the voters wanted him. We don't know how much they knew about him before they voted. Dave, though, what are your thoughts on all of this?
I mean, my main question was, who is vetting these candidates? I mean, the Nazi tattoo on his chest, that seems like a pretty big miss to miss that one. I don't know. There was a conservative broadcaster, Erickson, suggested that maybe they thought if this was on purpose, or they let it go thinking maybe his masculinity, like as a former Marine, maybe would help sway more, male voters towards the Democratic Party. I don't know, it seems very strange that all this was missed anyway to me, from my perspective.
All right, let's go to California because a Daily Mail poll found that 27% of California Democrats support the investigation into Governor Gavin Newsom and his wife. Now, this probe was one the governor announced himself, claiming political retaliation for his considering a presidential run. Chris, what do you think of this?
I don't know.
I feel the same exact way. Like, I have no idea.
Is that a gross who are these? Are these all of the other Democrats who are standing in line waiting to take his spot if he is going to pursue the path to the presidency? I don't know. I don't really trust the poll. I read the article. I looked around a little bit, and I couldn't find the research question. And I wonder how they phrased it, because the same poll also said that by a margin of over 10, I think it was like 14 or something like that, the respondents wanted Kamala Harris over him. And I don't believe that to be true. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about it, but definitely there is something to look into. I would still like to know what the investigation pertains to, because we haven't heard a lot of information about concretely what him and his wife are being investigated for. So maybe when we find more of that stuff out, maybe more people will do it. But until then, I'd see that number 27. I don't buy it.
Yeah, well, if there's 27, then it means there's a higher number of people that either oppose it or just didn't participate in this poll. I kind of agree with Chris. This is not a few years ago where Gavin Newsom had the momentum. So it's a little bit shocking to see that number and to see where he is in the polling. I think Democrats still haven't figured out their 28 candidate. I don't even know if Gavin Newsom has figured out that he does want to run for president in 28. So all of this is like, this is not real because he hasn't announced anything. Maybe they're all just trying to put out numbers to kind of see where they would end up netting out. But if this was a few years ago, I think this would make a little bit of a bigger noise in Democratic circles. I think the steam has kind of come off of not only the recall. Obviously, he got past that because California is a big blue state, but there have been other things that have happened with Newsom. I don't think he's in the same stranglehold in terms of Democrats being their 28 nominee like he was maybe a few years ago.
Definitely a lot up in the air, it seems. Dave, your thoughts, though?
I was very surprised, too, about this poll. I mean, 27% said they either strongly or somewhat support it. 39%, though, either strongly or somewhat are opposed it, 27% are either for it strongly or someone, 39% strongly are against it. 32%, though, had no opinion. So that means of the Democrats on here, 40% actually supported this, which is kind of surprising. Although we have to remember this is about his wife. It's not quite him. And like you said, he's resilient. He's survived a couple of recall votes. So
well, he says, by the way, he prefaced everything with "This is a witch hunt." Right, if you saw the initial video, and he said Trump's trying to come after me because he knows I'm going to be running for president, and he's trying to stop me.
I think the last guy in the video just said that the thing was fake and everything. See, we've got way too many scandals to keep track of. I don't know how you guys do it, but way too many scandals coming out.
There's other people saying the probe started under the Biden administration, so let's add more confusion to it.
Of course.
Let's go overseas, though, because a French court has shortened the ban on Marine Le Pen being able to hold office. She has said she will run for president in the French elections next year. She is also appealing her embezzlement conviction again. Chris, what do you make of all of this?
It's going to be difficult, even for the French sources that I do read, that are on the further right side, definitely more receptive to national rally candidates. She running for president with an ankle bracelet might be a bit of an issue because you can't really run anywhere. You can kind of just like wander around the house.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be an
It's
issue.
not
And she
effective.
admitted to that.
Yeah.
She said basically, there's Jordan Bardella, who's like her second in command. Maybe he's going to be out there doing something. Maybe she's going to hold off for a year. She did launch a website. Oh, it's like MarineLePen.com or something like that, where you can talk about why you support her and leave messages. I guess she's trying to establish an email list. Maybe she lost her old one. But yeah, I mean, she was convicted of stealing money. Embezzlement was the charge. And, you're going to have to convince voters in France that she should be on the ticket once more.
Can I just read for you guys? This is from the BBC's running blog about this. If I read this and you just closed your eyes, you didn't know anything about the story, you would be like, oh, that person's not going to get elected. This is the headline. Marine Le Pen found guilty, but court clears way for presidential run if she wears tag. That is a ridiculous header right there. Listen to the sentence. She's found guilty. Okay, so she committed a crime. Court clears the way for her to run for president. Okay, cool. But she needs an ankle bracelet? What year are we living in? Is this a D block? Is this supposed to be the hot wild? This is 100 out of 10. I mean, unfortunately right now we've opened the door in a couple different places to candidates, and I know Le Pen has run a few different times, but like we've opened the door to candidates that are just have a lot of baggage and are not serious. Back to Dave's, what do they do in France in terms of vetting? She's been around French politics for forever. This headline, in any normal walk of life, should disqualify somebody from running for
Well,
office.
it's a good thing it's 2026.
Yeah,
That's all I'll
seriously.
say. Because what else?
She was also making headlines earlier, though, with the whole heat wave across Europe, saying that if she becomes president, she will roll out AC. So that led to the whole thing where if you support ACs, you are far right, because the other side was saying, oh no, no ACs, no matter how hot it gets.
I've been to
Dave,
Europe
I'll let
during
you
heat
weigh in,
waves.
though. Do you want an AC?
I definitely want AC. I'm not planning to go to France anytime soon, I'll tell you that. But I read that while she's appealing, she doesn't have to wear her electron tag. So she's got that going for her.
She got freedom of movement.
There we go. Her legs are free. There we go.
Well, there's like 10 months to go and she leaves the polls. I wouldn't drop out either, but it's going to be tough to do it, obviously, from your basement if you have the tag on, so I don't know. It seems kind of a crazy situation to me, for sure.
All right, well, on that note, let's go to break, because coming up, fear in Midtown Manhattan as a skyscraper begins to buckle, sending to come back a Midtown Manhattan high-rise, the old Pfizer headquarters being converted to luxury apartments, suddenly declared unstable this morning after columns buckled and debris fell into the street during rush hour. City officials saying the problem starting on the 21st floor, where structural damage was discovered, prompting an immediate emergency response and evacuations around the building.
First responders from FDNY, NYSEM, and the Department of Buildings responded to the call immediately and found structural issues on the 21st floor. 2 structural columns have buckled, in addition to multiple cracks and sagging floors. The building remains unstable.
No injuries reported tonight, but police have closed streets around the tower while engineers working to stabilize the structure. Joining us now with more, Kobe Karp, founder of Kobe Karp Architecture and Interior Design. Kobe, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you. Now, the building has been described by construction worker and union rep Cliff Johnson as, quote, bending like cigarettes. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. These sort of scenarios are very critical. They are important to understand because this kind of a failure, as we are getting the data and the information from fire department and building department, clearly shows that there may have been human workers' interference with the structural integrity of the overall building.
And digging into that, in your view, what could have led to something like this?
Well, it looks as though the people who are working on the modifications to to the building, which was historically an office building, into a multi-family residential building.
Unqualified.
They have interfered with the existing structure, which has led to the weakness at certain columns and locations of the beams, which then allowed for the failure to come into the building, which then obviously creates a compromise, not only of that location, but potentially the whole structure itself.
And Kobe, as of this afternoon, the city determined that contractors can move forward with efforts to stabilize the building. What are some of the things the crew can do to prevent further damage or even a collapse?